I hope some of us at least came this morning curious about the question, is there a cure for the disease of corruption? And I want to begin by reading from a passage in the Bible. The Bible records, among other things, the story of Jesus, his earthly life. And this is an incident from the life of Jesus. Please follow with me as I read it. On one occasion, Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. And there was a man there named Zacchaeus. Everybody say Zacchaeus. That's not a very common Indian name, is it? But Zacchaeus is a central figure in the story. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. Any short people here? Good news for you. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Isn't that beautiful? Do you ever feel no one knows me? I'm really not known beyond my own little family circle. Well, what's beautiful is every time the Bible records God's intervention in the lives of people, God, Jesus, always calls us by name. This was his first meeting, and Jesus knows Zacchaeus' name. He says, Zacchaeus, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. Guess what? Just because something good happens to you doesn't mean everybody's going to celebrate. He has gone to the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord. Notice the word Lord. That word Lord is very important because that confession, that experience represents the turning point in the life of Zacchaeus. Let me say that again. I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. Simple story. Jesus walks into the life and into the home of this evil, corrupt tax collector named Zacchaeus and turns his life right side up. Just what happened to you, Sulagna. Warning. Jesus always has this effect on people who invite him into their lives sincerely. When he comes into your life will never be the same again. Our topic for today, is there a cure for the disease of corruption? When it comes to the issue of corruption, and I'm going to share with you a story in light vein, but when it comes to the issue of corruption, who are the most common targets? Whipping boys. Our favorite whipping boys are politicians. And so I'm going to tell you this, probably fiction, but I think it makes a point. 3 politicians from the countries of Italy, Somalia, and India had become friends while attending a session at the United Nations. And they decided they were going to make it a point to try and visit each other's homes in the ensuing months. And so, as it happened, the occasion came for them to first visit the friend in Italy. And as the Indian and Somalian politician arrived at his home, they were amazed to see the plush villa and obvious signs of wealth. And the other two couldn't resist asking him, how do you manage such a comfortable lifestyle on a politician's salary? Without saying a word, the Italian politician called them to the window and pointed out of the window. He said, can you see that big bridge out there? You know, that's the most important link between uptown and downtown areas of my city. They looked at the bridge, very impressive. Of course, they said to one another, that is indeed a good-looking bridge. And of course, the obvious question, what does that have to do with your wealth? And he looked at them and smiled, saying, 10%. A few months later, it was the Indian politician's turn to host his Italian and Somalian friend. And something similar happens. In fact, this time they are really quite surprised. They said, we thought this was a poor country. How can you afford such an opulent lifestyle? The Indian politician, like any wise man, you know, these are days of tehelka, goes, opens the door, looks on either side to see if anyone's listening, and then comes back and says, come to the window. Do you see that big bridge out there? And they saw it. I'm not sure if it is a bridge that recently collapsed, but they said, well, you know, that bridge has helped bring a lot of trade and commerce to my city. And by now they're smiling. And he says, yes. He said, 50%. And you can guess what happened not long after they were in the country of Somalia. By the way, I'll tell you why we picked on Somalia. The Italian and Indian are stunned by this huge mansion and luxurious lifestyle in what is one of the poorest countries in the world. And they look to their friend for an explanation. Something similar happened. He takes him to the window and points. Do you see that bridge there across the river? Because both of them peer hard, scan the horizon, and not able to see any bridge, they shake their heads and turn to the host. And he nods his head. Smiling indulgently says, 100%. You laugh at that story, and if you heard it before, you didn't mind hearing it again. Because it's about politicians. You and I know, friends, that politicians do not have a monopoly on corruption, do they? Corruption is rampant everywhere. And for us here in India, it has almost become a way of life. In fact, Transparency International, and I'll tell you in a moment if you've not heard of that organization, have a corruption index. And their corruption perception index for the year 2012, India ranks 94 out of a total of 174 countries. I know what many of you are saying, Pastor, not bad. We are 80 ranks away from the bottom rung. Friends, last year, India was 87. So we've slid down. Corruption in our world and in our nation has impacted everything, hasn't it? Politics, bureaucracy, sport, and even the sacred judiciary. I like the way one person put it, and I came across this in a magazine. And they tried to personalize corruption in a very interesting template, and I want to share that with you. And if you belong to any of these categories, please don't be offended. But he said, in India, we can summarize corruption in terms of these five major players: the Neta, Babu, Lala, Jhola, and Dada. Because you all understand Neta, the corrupt politician; the Babu, the corrupt bureaucrat; the Lala, the corrupt trader; Jhola, the corrupt NGO or religious organization; and the Dada, the corrupt criminal who lives down the road from you and who controls the pada, you know. Yes, friends, the curse of corruption pervades all of life. It's a demon that lurks behind every institution, and it seems to have its evil tentacles in every sphere. The curse of corruption. But friends, if you think corruption is only an Indian problem, you're sadly mistaken. According to Transparency International, which is a German-based global coalition against corruption, it's an NGO which tries to bring together the global conscience in a war against corruption. They describe corruption as a major threat facing humanity, which destroys individual lives and communities. At this point, undermining institutions and countries. In fact, the last few years particularly, all across the globe, we see the corruption arousing people's anger, generating violent conflict, and even threatening to destabilize societies. So you have anti-corruption movements, not just in India, but in various parts of the world. It's not too far from where we live. In the Middle East, we've had the Arab Spring protests over the last 2 years in Middle East and North Africa. Financial fraud, bribery, scams, extortion and cheating, affecting some of the basic necessities of life, the distribution of food to the poor, education, healthcare, essential infrastructure. Corruption is all pervasive, isn't it? No less a person than our late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi once publicly admitted that out of every 100 rupees sanctioned by the government for any public program, only rupees 20 actually benefits people. This is the Prime Minister of our country admitting that 1 out of every 5 rupees only reaches the beneficiary. I know many of you are, I can see you saying, wow, that's terrible. You know, the government is corrupt. And yes, yes. And many of you are saying amens inside. Well, I want to turn the spotlight a little bit from what is outward to ourselves. Can we do that? What about us? You and me? Has corruption affected us? I know what many of you are saying, Pastor, you know who I am? Do you know how long I've attended this church? Do you know my impeccable, sterling reputation? Well, let me put a few questions before you. Have you ever, and when I say ever, I mean at any time since you arrived on this planet, at any time, have you ever cheated in an exam or asked your neighbor for the answer during a test? Don't raise your hand, please. Have you ever lied about your age or your children's age so that you could get a half ticket or a concession on a fare? Has anyone here never bribed a traffic policeman to avoid a ticket? Have you ever paid, we call it capitation fee. Okay, we've given it sort of a polished name. I'm talking about unreceipted money to ensure a school or college seat for your child? Have you ever given any money under the table, bakshish, to get your work done in a KMC office or government office? I know what you're saying. Pastor, do you live on this planet? I'm just asking you a question. I'm not passing judgment now. I'm just asking you, have you ever done it? Have you ever avoided paying your taxes? Or any tax dues? I know this is going to be painful when you don't have a train reservation. Have you ever paid the TC money to get yourself a berth or seat to push you ahead on the wait list? Have you ever? Have you ever jumped the queue when you're waiting to book a ticket or make some payment at a counter or window? Have you ever? Don't look at me with accusing eyes. Pastor, that was under the belt. Well, the Bible says, all have sinned and come short of God's glory. And I'm telling you, in India, when it comes to corruption, there's no one righteous. No, not one. In fact, if you tell me you have never ever done any of these things or similar things, even once at any time in your life, you're either a saint or a liar. The curse of corruption. On a scale of 0, meaning highly corrupt, to 100, meaning very clean, Transparency International finds that no country has a perfect score. And in fact, what is distressing is over 2/3 of the countries listed have a score below 50, indicating a serious corruption problem in our world. Yes, friends, corruption is a curse. Where does it come from? Why is there corruption in society? What causes it? Well, I want to list very quickly the ones we are quick to point out. Poor governance. You know, this country, license Raj, red tapeism. Pastor, better governance will eliminate corruption. Yes? Of course, to an extent. Many of us will cite economic compulsions. Pastor, this is a poor country. There's corruption in public life. And I'm telling you, if you eradicate poverty, you will eradicate corruption. Well, we'll see about that in a moment. Social discrimination is, of course, an important cause. Let me say, if not a cause, at least symptom for corruption. Our society is riddled with all kinds of discriminations based on caste, social class, and gender. And so you have the slogan that says, reform society and you will get rid of corruption. Better governance, poverty eradication, social reform. Well, here's the problem, friends. Here the evidence before us by way of the corruption index of Transparency International indicates that there are many societies which have good governance, strong economy, little or no social discrimination compared to India, and still have corruption. No, friends, we must dig deeper if we want to pinpoint the cause. Any doctor knows it's not enough to treat the symptoms. You've got to go down a good diagnosis of the root cause. I'm sure many of us have heard of the name G.K. Chesterton, one of the most influential English writers of the 20th century. It is said that on one occasion, the Times newspaper in London asked a number of authors to write on the topic What's wrong with the world? Listen to that. What's wrong with the world? And of course, the authors were expected to send in informed, fairly comprehensive assessment of what they thought were the problems with the world. Listen to Chesterton's response. He writes his letter to the editors. He says, "Dear sirs, I am sincerely yours, G.K. Chesterton." Did you get the point? What's wrong with the world? Chesterton's answer was very simple. Two small English words. I am. Here's the truth. At the end of the day, the root cause of corruption is not out there somewhere. It's in here. You know what? For effect, if you believe what I've just said, I want you to say it with me. Not out there. Come on, say it with me. Not out there. It's in here. Not out there. It's in here. So when you leave this place and people say, what did you hear today? At least remember that, okay? What's that? Not out there. In here. Greed and selfishness. Greed for more. More money. More power. More possessions. More position. More of me and what is mine. Come on, what do we look for? Security. Whose security? My security. Happiness. Whose happiness? My happiness. Family. Whose family? My family. My community. So the root cause of corruption, G.K. Chesterton's words, I am. Greed and selfishness in the hearts of people. Yes, we've looked at the curse and the cause. And I trust you're convinced with me this morning that corruption is a deadly and dangerous disease. But how can we fight it? We are here this morning to see if there is a cure. And I want us to turn to that in conclusion. The cure for corruption. On the grave of Karl Marx's tombstone in Highgate Cemetery in London, we find the following words inscribed. I quote, "Philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. I'm no follower of Karl Marx. But this is something we all can heartily endorse. Anyone can talk about how bad the corruption problem is. The point is not just to describe it or analyze it or interpret it. The point is to change it. But do we have a cure for the disease of corruption? If so, what is it? Well, right now, there's a lot of hue and cry in Parliament about legislative reform, administrative reform, as a way to try and prevent corruption. Well, constitutional experts tell us that India already has one of the finest constitutions in the world. Can it be improved? Yes. But despite having one of the finest constitutions in the world, our beautiful constitution has not succeeded in preventing corruption up to this point. Well, there's also a lot of pressure on law enforcement to do their job. And of course, they should do their job more efficiently. The media these days is also playing an important role, isn't it, as whistleblower and watchdog. They help up to a point. But have you noticed, especially when it comes to the issue of the treatment of women and the issue of rape, all that you find the newspapers have succeeded in doing is reporting more cases, that's all. Education, social reform, so important that we do everything we can to create a social awareness, a value system, and that's something that is so essential to the fabric of any society, isn't it? Some definition of what is good, particularly in a country like ours, which is so multicultural, with all kinds of values. It's important to be able to decide a common system by which we agree upon what is good, acceptable behavior and what is not. But then again, we could carve out the most beautiful value system. But having those values is no guarantee that we will adhere to them, is there? In fact, the Apostle Paul says this. He says, the law is great. It's good. He says this in Romans 6 and 7. But the problem is, I'm unable to keep the law. I know the law is good, but I'm unable to keep it. Let me remind you, we have concluded that the root cause of corruption is greed and selfishness in the hearts of people. People are corrupt. Some more than others. I know what some of you are saying, Pastor, I'm not really that corrupt. But we've been through that diagnosis, haven't we already? It's people who are corrupt, friends. And for our world to change, it is people who must first change from within. From within. Corruption is not the root. It's merely the fruit of the tree called greed and self-centeredness. 2,000 years ago, this is how Jesus defined the source of all corruption in human life. He says these words, for from within, out of a person's heart, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustful desires, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. From where? Out of the hearts of people. So if corruption is the fruit and the tree is self-centered greed, the root is what the Bible calls sin. Sin is the disease, my friends. And diseases are deadly things. But thank God for remedies. Remedies are wonderful. Is there a cure for the deadly disease of corruption? The root cause of which is sin. Well, I'm going to end where we began. Good old Zacchaeus. For the story of Zacchaeus shows us that there is indeed a cure for the disease of corruption. Corruption can be rooted out. Here was a corrupt tax collector. In fact, in the time of Jesus, there wasn't a more despicable species of human being you could find than a tax collector. Become rich through self-centeredness and greedy exploitation of people. People detested him because of that. But then one day Jesus walked into the life and home of Zacchaeus and turned his life right side up. They could hardly believe their ears, these people who hated him, who despised him. When, as a result of Zacchaeus' encounter with Jesus, he jumps to his feet and he says, I will give half my wealth to the poor. And as if that isn't enough, he says, and I will, if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them 4 times as much. And you can imagine, jaws dropped, mouths wide open. Is this for real? Can this actually happen? Will this wealthy, evil tax collector give away half his wealth and repay not just what he's taken, not even a small percentage, but 300%? Can this happen? Well, friends, let me introduce you to the Jesus factor. Jesus can change the hardest human heart. He can break the power of corruption over our lives. He can give us a new heart so that we can begin a new life. I want you to listen very carefully. Actually, if you can read it with me, even better. This verse from the Bible, listen to what it says or read it with me. Anyone, it'll come up now. Let's read it together. Anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. That was Zacchaeus' experience, friends. The moment he met Jesus, the light, the darkness in his life was turned upside down. 2,000 years later, in the life of this young lady, Sulagna, Jesus made the same difference, turned her life right side up. And he can do that for you this morning. Is there a cure for the disease of corruption? I present it to you this morning. His name is Jesus Christ. When he died on the cross and he rose again from the dead, he made a way for every human being to have a living personal relationship with God through him. And you know what? You may not be as corrupt as Zacchaeus. You may not be in jail for credit card fraud like Sulagna was. But every one of us this morning has a heart that needs to be changed.